My feeling is that he would wake up in the middle of the night and think, why am I not sleeping? I haven't had my sleeping pill, in a drowsy state, so take a couple more. Since then, of course, it's become legendary, and there's millions of rumors about, did he kill himself, was he killed, who did this and that. If anyone was the fifth Beatle, it was Brian, you know. And my initial impression was it was just a shop we went into to gaze and admire all the beautiful record covers and occasionally to buy a record. NEM stood for North End Music Stores, and Brian's dad, who's Harry, had once sold a piano to my dad, which I still have, so there was like a family connection before I even knew it. So for people who like to think things are fated, there we are, you know, it was even before I knew him. My dad at the time, when he heard about it, he said, this could be a very good thing. He said, he thought Jewish people were very good with money. This was the kind of common wisdom. So he thought Brian would be very good for us. He thought he was very sensible, very charming, and he was right. Having gone to RADA, as we found out later, he was completely different from anyone in the Liverpool music scene. He was quite different from anybody else. John and I used to wait at Lime Street Station in a little coffee bar called Punch and Judy. We used to wait for Brian arriving back from London, and he'd come off the train and we'd sort of take a look at his face, you know, to see if it was like good news or bad. It was always bad. We'd have a cup of coffee and discuss why, what had happened. But he would just say, you know, people aren't generally interested, you know, it's going to be a hard sell, you know. We see, we were just Liverpool guys, so the word was queer, not gay. And it wasn't, we didn't really have a problem with it. It was just something you made fun of. That's the way it was. You know, we didn't actually know any. Well, we probably did, but we didn't talk about it. The word was out that Brian was gay amongst people, you know. The great thing for us was it didn't really affect us in any way. I think we suspected that he might hit on one of us. So I think we were kind of, in the early days, we were slightly sort of wondering whether that was his interest in us. But in my personal knowledge, he didn't. I don't actually know the truth of the John rumor. I mean, all I can ever say about that is I slept with John a lot, just because you had to sleep and, you know, you didn't have more than one bed. And to my knowledge, John was never gay. It might have been, I suspected that the John thing and Brian was a power play on John, because John was a very political animal. And John, I suspect, went away on that Spanish holiday or wherever it was. Number one, because nobody went on holiday. So anyone, I would have gone. Anyone would have gone. Off a free holiday? You kidding? Yes, I'm there. Number two, I'm sure John took Brian aside and said, hey, you want to deal with this group? I'm the guy you deal with, okay? John was that kind of guy, very sensible, very pragmatic. So I'm sure that was the main reason John went there. Now, as to whether there was any sort of gay dalliance or whatever, I don't know. I can't tell you that. But I know that Brian was very straightforward with me about it. We could talk about it quite openly, particularly, obviously, once we got to know each other. And I say, he never hit on me. At all. You know, there was never any question of it at all. And I say, we lived so intimately together that there would have been one evening when he's sort of drunk and so on, so on, so on. So it would have been in his character to do that. A guy called Al Aronowitz, who was a friend of his, and his road manager. Yeah, baby. I think they were the people who had the part, actually. And Bob kind of gets blamed for it. I'm not sure he's too happy with that rap.
Hello, 10.
That night, anyway, was the first time I think all of us had smoked pot.
Their manager's name is Mr. Brian Epstein.
George and I were sitting on this bed, and Brian was sort of lying there rather grandly, as he would. He was very grand. Brian's greatest, you know, ah! This was Brian's expression. What do you think of it? Ah! Everything was, ah! So, you know, you knew exactly what he meant. And so he's lying on the bed, very sort of grand, you know, beautifully dressed and everything. And I've got this image of him with a tiny little bit of a butt, like an old tramp, you know, trying to be graceful, this terrible little fag end. And actually we all got stoned, and we're giggling. It was giggling times. We were giggling uncontrollably. And Brian was looking at himself. He's going, Jew. Hysterical. To give him his due, though, Brian and us would not know about those kind of things. British people at that time didn't know about that stuff. I'm not so sure how much they know about it now, but I think the problems arose in as much as he was from Liverpool. He hadn't done this before. He had the great theatricality, but he hadn't done this kind of business before. So I think some of the deals that he got us were great for the time, but not as it turned out. You know, I can look back on it now and say he could have done that, he could have asked for that. But I just don't think any of us knew about that then. It was very early days, you know.
The Beatles made a statement in all the newspapers that they're getting more better than Jesus himself, and the Ku Klux Klan, being a religious order, is going to come out here the night that they appear at the Coliseum here. I shall have about 50 men in robes, and I'll have quite a few inside the stadium.
We'd had enough of it with the trouble we were running into. I finally agreed with the other guys because it took me a little while to come around. I thought we'd tour forever. But I started to realize, yeah, it was going to be a problem. When we actually did finish touring, I suppose Brian felt his role was decreasing. And I think that was a sadness to him. I think that actually was what was happening. I think the problem was we were starting to feel we didn't really need much management. We were now in the studio making Sgt. Pepper. And Brian kept out, to give him, again, to his credit, he kept out of our face in the studio. In fact, we actually wanted him to visit a little more because we liked him. So it was always nice when he showed up. But he was very, no, I won't interrupt. I'm just 2 seconds. Gotta go. No, there was no question in our minds that if we were to be managed, it would be by Brian. We dealt with it very quickly. He said, Robert Stigwood wants to buy you. We said, oh, yeah. He said, and we're having a meeting with him and one of his business people. And we said, oh, yeah. Well, we're not very keen on this, Brian. You know that, don't you? So we waited till the meeting. And then they said, well, they're talking about the conditions. And we said, well, let's just get this straight. We're not going to be sold to anyone. If you can continue to manage us, we love you. We're not going to be sold. He said, in fact, if you somehow manage to pull this off, or someone, there's a trick here, he said, we can promise you one thing. We will record God Save the Queen for every single record we make from now on, and we'll sing it out of tune. That is a promise. So if this guy buys us, that's what he's buying. Memory of mine, in his polka dot scarf, at the back of the crowd, holding himself very proud of his boys, you know. No one else was going to stack up against Brian, in my mind.